welcome to the Resilient Mental State Podcast. I'm Kyle Shepard, husband, father, and resilience instructor of over 10 years. Join me as I sit down with writers, independent thinkers, and extraordinary individuals to discuss their unique wisdom through the lens of resilience. Resilience is the ability to effectively manage and recover from stress. It is essential to endure and grow from life's inevitable adversities. Resilience is a skill that can be trained. William Spears, you and I are about the same age, yet you have served in the United States Navy for, I think, more than twice the amount of time that I have. So as you know, I'm an audiologist, and I've been serving now for 12 and a half years, and that's my primary responsibility. We've gotten the chance to chat a few times, and you know I do a few other things in the military, but I'm part of the Medical Service Corps, and while without question I'm very proud of my service, I tend to think of my job as getting to serve those who serve, particularly in an operational capacity. And that is without question you. So for, I believe, over 25 and a half years now, you have been in the submarine community. You're a submarine warfare officer and awesomely identify as a ship driver. And if that's not cool enough, last year you released the book that's sitting behind me, Stoicism as the Warrior Philosophy. And it is without question one of the best books I have read, modern books that I've read on Stoicism. Your interpretation of the philosophy, and more importantly, your application in a leadership role in the military and really in life, which you expand upon in this book, resonated with me, unlike many other books that I've read. And I've read many on Stoicism and other philosophies. And it's just such a pleasure to get to talk to you tonight.
Hey, I really appreciate it, Kyle. On that note, since you do mention I am active duty just as you are, it is important to note that I have to say this before like every podcast, but like you too, like anything that either of us say just represent our own opinions and do not represent a position of the Department of War or anything like that. If like I find if I don't say that, then I'm going to render an opinion at some point on whether, whiskey or gin is better. And then that will become the Navy's opinion. And, oh, the Navy likes gin, and which is ridiculous because the Navy likes rum, and everyone knows that, so anything that we're saying is just us. And we're not here speaking on behalf of the institution or anything. But anyway, that being said, like really glad to be here. This is cool. Like, for the listeners, Kyle and I, were talking before this and like, if we lived in the same neighborhood, we'd hang out every day, but we don't. So we just have to do this, and you guys just have to listen to it.
And you were on the move much more than I am. I've bounced around a little bit, but my goodness, for almost 26 years, some of the duty stations you've had, the roles that you've played, and the ships you've been on, it's very cool not only to see your service, but how you have consolidated your experiences and derived this philosophy through Stoicism to be a better leader, to be a better father, to be a better uniformed service officer, and really just community member and person in the world. I'm curious, when did you start getting into Stoicism and thinking about philosophy related to yourself?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll say is like all those wonderful things you just said are like what I hope to be. That's like what I admire. I'm when I look in the mirror, I'm a normal guy, and I try to be all those things because that's what a human being should do. A human being should try to be better than they are. And that's a very, very ancient and old impulse. And this philosophy I have found is better than any other discrete philosophy that I have uncovered at, facilitating that. Doesn't mean it's perfect. It is not a final truth handed down. It is people, human beings thinking about things thousands of years ago. And it turns out that most of what they were thinking about is still relevant. So how did I get into it? I picked it up at the Naval Academy. So Stoicism is popular, has always been popular at the Naval Academy, largely due to James Stockdale, who is a kind of a heroic figure within the Navy. I'm sure not all of your listeners are in the Navy, but Stockdale was a air wing commander and fighter pilot who was shot down in Vietnam and captured and was a prisoner of war. But it happened to be before that ever happened, he was also a very, very deeply philosophical guy and very, very well read, specifically in the Stoics. And he found that as you know, as soon as he's captured and he becomes a prisoner of war, he's like the senior guy there because he was the air group commander whenever he got shot down. And so he's immediately responsible to take charge of all of the prisoners in this situation and basically in charge of good order and discipline, and codes of conduct and things like that, as promulgated through tap codes through the walls, because these guys are in solitary confinement when they're not being tortured. So it was just this really horrendous situation. He was there for 7 years, and he found the Stoics specifically to be extremely conducive to his situation and maintaining his sense of honor and moral agency in that scenario. And that's not, I don't write much about his specific situation, at least not in my book, because it's a lot of it's been written on before. But that's how I came into it. Stockdale, he was awarded the Medal of Honor after he was repatriated to the United States, and like a crazy person, he stayed in the Navy. He didn't go on his book tour and go make his movie deals and all that. He stayed in the Navy and continued advancing in rank. Eventually becomes a admiral. In his senior post as a 3-star admiral and the president of the Naval War College, he develops personally a course in moral philosophy for the leaders there because he thought it was that important. And he taught some of the courses himself, and he begins lecturing on this guy named Epictetus. And this is like in the 70s, this is a long time ago, and this is long before anyone ever heard of Stoic blogs or anything like that. And in this time he's like publishing articles in the Atlantic and things like that on Epictetus and how this applies to his scenario in Vietnam. And most people are like scratching their heads like, what is the old guy on about? Who's the Stoics? What is that? He develops some interest, especially within the military. But outside of in popular culture, it doesn't really blow up until many years later. And it takes the internet to cause that to happen. And that's where we're at now. And it is definitely popular now. But yeah, so it's always had like this undercurrent at the Naval Academy, and I kind of picked it up there and picking up his book in between classes and stuff like that. And then that was before it really blew up in pop culture, and then it blew up in pop culture. I'm like, okay, I need to write a book on this, and that's kind of what it did. So that's where we're at now.
Well, you did one hell of a job, and if there's another and I love what you said about aspiring to be good, by the way, and it's just such a great way to look at anything. So, like, if you think you're squared away and you think you're good, and to each his own, but, like, if you call yourself a stoic, like, I've already attained this label, I am that, you're gonna be, at risk for sure. So,
Yeah.
continuing to aspire, every day you're gonna fail, every day, hopefully you're gonna have success too because you set your standards at a level to do both. I found the same thing in Stoic philosophy for myself. Like, how can I apply this myself in attempt to be better and align with the priorities and the roles that I have in my life, whether that's personal and or professional? And my goodness, you said it, Stockdale and his writings, whether it's through the military or some of his public facing books, in Love and War, the one he wrote with his wife, longer
Yeah.
book, just phenomenal. And he does weave in some of his philosophy. And you mentioned Epictetus, which he mentions many Stoic philosophers, but like you, he brings up Epictetus more than others. And if I recall, on his way when he was shot down, he said he was entering the world of Epictetus, and boy, did he call that right, considering the experiences that he went through when he was a prisoner of war.
Yeah, the serendipity of like him being the guy with this philosophy, in this situation, him being the senior guy there and the one that drifts down into the Vietnam from his parachute, like you could not have picked a better human being on earth for that task. And like, how much must have that sucked to be him? And yet, like, I am the guy for this job right now. However much this sucks, how much I don't want it, but that's where he was, and he was the right guy for that time, and it's just really amazing.
Like Epictetus, he was the old man amongst all those prisoners, and my
Yeah,
goodness, did he answer the call. And he put
yeah,
that philosophy into action, not for a day, but for years. And then after he came home, continued to do so. Yeah, you talk about modern Stoics, without question, one of my favorites.
yeah,
And come to mention that name, the forward in your book, James Stockdale II, pretty cool. How'd you, when did you get a chance to meet him and how'd you line that up?
So, like, that was just luck also. My in the current job I'm at right now, my cubicle mate, like, when I reported to the job, he's like, "Oh, I was the CO of USS Stockdale, and, like, I could introduce you to Jim Stockdale if you want." Like, "Well, yeah." You know? And that was before the book was published. That was whenever it was getting finalized and everything, and so I was able to get it over to Jim, and he loved it, and so I basically asked, "Hey, would you mind making a little blurb for the back?" And he's like, "Oh, absolutely, I'd love to." And then he wrote that long thing. I'm like, "That's not a blurb, that's a forward. Hey, do you mind if I make this a forward?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely, sure." He's like real bashful about it. I'm like, "Damn, this is great," you know. So yeah, so he really helped me out there, and he just wonderfully nice man. So it was really cool and just really lucky that I got introduced to him too.
Amazing. I have, my wife named our first son, and she allowed me to name our second. And there are a lot of James throughout history that I look up to, that I've been a big fan of from books, movies, or whatever. But at the top of the list, James Stockdale. So my second
Yeah.
son, his name is James. So
Yeah, he's a guy that people need to know about, and I feel like, he is very well celebrated within the Navy, especially as like, oh, heroic guy. But if you ask a random person like, what was his deal? Most of them will tell you, oh yeah, he's the POW guy. It's like there's more to it than that. It's not just the POW guy, not the guy who was a good leader as a POW. Like his whole like construct, and then the rest of his life and the fidelity that he demonstrated to principle throughout his life is just something very remarkable that needs to be remembered well. I think that it's very important that we study the heroes is just as a broader point for and this is just a time honored form of instruction of like how do we teach virtue. It's a profound thought that virtue can be taught, but that was basically a precept of most of the old schools of Athens. And I think it's an important precept today. Yes, we can teach virtue. Okay, how do we teach it? Well, I think we can hardly do worse than pointing to the heroes and say that that's what right looks like. Be like that, and I think that personalizes a lot of the qualities that we aspire to in a human. And we celebrate these people and we admire these qualities because they're admirable. And that it's worth pointing that out, that like, yes, the heroic person is really cool, but why are they cool? Well, because that's what a human is supposed to be. you know and I think that that's an important thing to name. Whenever you name it, you're inevitably brought a little bit closer to it, I think.
I couldn't agree more. The power of stories and how we've passed them down through time, through whatever background, religion, philosophy, or just names that are well known. And the success stories are great, and you hear about conquerors and all of that, but it's really that virtue, that demonstration of character, particularly in response to adversity. And then you can start digging into that and defining some of these things and thinking about not only how do you teach it on top of that conceptually, but something like virtue, that also needs to be really self-learned through experience intentionally, and then putting yourself into those positions to make it something that you do, not necessarily by default because you're going to struggle every day, but something that you ultimately self-derive, because you'll see a lot of variability in not only definitions but even conduct, and it's very hard for me to determine someone else's intentions, assumptions, or anything else that's going on in their head to determine whether an action is virtuous or not. But I know damn well virtue as it cuts through me if my actions are aligning with what I intend to do, my soul, and the roles that I play. I'm curious, how do you, as you got into Stoicism and thinking about your application of it in the Navy and for warriors, what did you start doing to try and teach virtue and some of the things that you write about in your book?
I think that trying to demonstrate, trying to be the example that people are going to copy, because they're gonna copy you, and like recognizing that as a moral imperative. And it's kind of now that as I moved up a little bit, it's one of the things that I tell junior officers, especially when they're slobbing around or complaining or just looking sloppy or being lazy, whatever. If I need to set someone straight, it's often in the context of like, hey, everyone's going to copy you. Okay. Especially an officer. Like you're an officer here. You are the example of what right looks like, whether you like that or not. And so that means that everything that you do is going to cause ripples in this world and people will emulate you whether you like it or not, and that is a massive responsibility. Okay, and I mean it absolutely. You're a parent. It absolutely applies to parent. You are the definition of what a man is. you know, you are what a man is, and to these people, and that is an incredible responsibility. You're what right looks like, and but I think that as far as how to teach virtue, I think that that's the first thing is to get yourself straight, recognizing that you're gonna be copied and do as I say, not as I do. You can say it all you want. It just doesn't work. you know, the chances are the people around you are going to be something like you. And this is a huge you know, leadership phenomenon that especially that it really implies a lot of importance on who we place in charge of things and what people we select to make leaders because everyone's going to copy them whether they want that or not and their influence is going to ripple throughout the organization powerfully and everyone's going to act like them. A good example of this is one of the jobs that I used to have. It was one of the shore duties I had in between submarines is I got to be a member of this team, uh, at the time it was called the Combat Readiness Evaluation Team. Now it's called something different, but the basic idea was we would go you take a team of tactical experts and you go onto a submarine and you basically impose this simulated wartime environment and we sit there with our clipboards and the ship runs the schedule of drills that we've assigned them and we shoot exercise torpedoes and all kinds of things and it's like this whole simulated war and we really stress them out and the goal is to find the weaknesses and basically see how their training programs are working, making sure that they're ready for combat. And so we'd come on board and stress out this crew and just judge the crap out of them. And I feel really bad. And if any one of those guys are listening, I'm sorry you did great. I really apologize for the hell I put you through. But it was a very extremely good opportunity to see how ships work and how crews work and the leadership dynamics. And from basically the moment that I would step aboard a ship, I could tell you what the captain was going to be like within about 5 minutes of being on board, because of the personality of the crew. And like different crews have different personalities. And it's always in broad strokes. It's not going to be a perfect one to one, but it's going to definitely be observable that if the crew is, kind of victimized and like they're always feeling sorry for themselves, I'm going to probably find a kind of victimized captain at the top. Or if the crew's like neurotic and trying to cover up things and like really doesn't want to not forthcoming with any of their faults, then I'm probably going to find a captain at the top that's really preoccupied with his reputation, and like you can spot it a mile away and it's just like instant. And you just develop this sense for it. Whenever you go from ship to ship to ship and crew to crew, you develop this sense for it immediately of kind of like the flavor of the crew as soon as you come on board and how they act and how they interact with each other and how they interact with you and how they talk and do things. And the thing is this leadership phenomena, when you go into like all the popular leadership books in the bookstore and everything, they'll give this stuff terms like, leader imprinting and, organizational culture and all this stuff. This is stuff that people have known since ships were powered by oars. Leaders have massive influence and it's really important who we put in charge, and this is not a new thing. And, some theorists can give it a name, but it's like, it's common sense. It's just stuff that but recognizing that, especially when you are a leader, that your influence is going to be copied or your example is going to be copied, however you feel about it, it's going to happen. So you better make it a good one. Yeah.
This is what I love about your book, in that you, of course, write about Stoicism is a warrior philosophy. So you apply it to one of my favorite things when I study any concept, extreme environments, if you will, compared to the standard population. But these lessons that we can draw from extreme forms of hardship, adversity, or unusual situations can be applied to the mundane and the average life. And what you talked about initially with teaching virtue, it starts first with your actions, not what you say. We know, like, you go to someone for, let's say, a doctor who's telling you how to get in shape and they're not in shape themselves, or a teacher who's preaching something, but then you know their actions don't align with it anyway. It doesn't matter if it is an adult or a child, like you said with parenting. We're always observing well before, and I try to remind myself of this every day in the parenting realm. Like, man, I can give these great speeches about what is needed from them and expectations and the why behind it. If I am not doing those things that I am preaching, my kids will see that and not listen to anything for sure. And they're probably not listening to anything, even if I am doing those things. So I better damn sure be doing the right thing and demonstrating the conduct that I think I would aspire them to be like one day. So I'm really intentional about that in my involvement in all the activities. But coming back to the workplace, for sure, something as simple as complaining. And we need times to vent. You need times to say, like, this is bullshit, and talk to those
Yeah.
friends that you can be honest with. But if you're complaining to your teams and the people who work with and for you, you're going to affect that culture as a leader. And I'm a strong believer that, yeah, you have one employee that is really tough that can affect an environment and impact the culture. But if you have a virtuous person of moral character and conduct, that light can overshine that darkness if they don't let that feel affect them. But from a leadership standpoint, man, it's going to take some deep dives into books like yours and really thinking about what you can control, regardless of a bad leader above you, influencing the entire culture of that team. So the
Yeah.
power
Uh,
of poor leadership, it's, it needs to be known and it needs to be taught. And you see the Navy doing it much more these days, which is nice.
One thing I'll say about complaining is that it is for complainers, which is to say, it's bad and you're going to do it. It's natural and we're going to screw it up. We're also all going to lie. Like there's all kinds of other things that we're going to do, but don't let complaining become your personality and like don't tolerate it if it is. And so that's you'll have like one in 10 people or so who like, oh yeah, I'm just a cynical guy and that's just who I am and it's funny and everyone knows me. I'm just gonna complain all the time. And it's like, well, if that's you, then like fix that because it's wrong. That's like saying bad breath is just my personality. Like go brush your teeth. You gotta do something about that. Like it's like name it as a problem. Like recognize that complaining or any other like negative personality trait, don't accept anything as just uncorrectable. Like you have agency in this process and maybe it's hard to correct, maybe it's a habit, so it's a habit, so like work at it. Name it, at least recognize that this thing isn't intrinsic to you. And whether it's complaining, whether it's feeling bad, sorry for yourself or worrying or whatever the negative thing is, like name it first as a thing to correct and then work at it and just even naming it and recognizing it as wrong and not intrinsic is a step in the right direction. Yeah, complaining it's we're all going to do it. It's very cathartic. It's absolutely human and it's corrosive and it's contagious and like especially as a leader you can't do it. Like it's just going to, especially if you start the victimhood stuff, like gosh, like basically, whenever you're a senior leader, you recognize anything that I do, they're going to do twice as much. Like whatever it is, they're going to do it twice as hard. And so, you know, the the complaining it'll propagate very quickly, and then some inspection team's going to come on and like break out their clipboards and immediately know what's going on.
Yeah, and it's inevitable we're gonna have poor leaders that demonstrate some of these characteristics at times. But if you're in any semblance of a leadership position, which whether that's professionally or personally, we all are, for sure. You can give me any job or any person, and you are a leader of somebody, if anyone other than yourself, but you have influence on other people.
Mhm.
And we talk about I mean, a great thing from Stoicism is impressions and then subsequent action based on those impressions. And we tend to use a lot of those external uncontrollable factors that influence our attitude and then our conduct. Like that's an excuse for complaining or poor behavior. And you hear this word trigger a lot these days. Like that triggers me. Like that allows you to have a poor attitude and to complain or to do something differently. Your bad breath statement, by the way, that is hilarious. I'm going to remember that one and use that. Like my bad breath is part of my personality. But triggers, I, I really try to reframe words as much as possible to make them empowering for me. So I've tried to take external triggers out of my life and then just apply them to myself. So whether it is in response to some of those old school external triggers that would trigger me, which I can't stand, if I hear myself complaining or if I hear myself saying should, so like should statements. I had some psychologists that influenced me at Naval Hospital Guam when I got into some of that resilience stuff. And I was teaching some of these concepts and they'd say, quit shoulding all over yourself. And that stuck with me too, because I like that.
Can you elaborate a little bit more? Because I want to hear what this is.
So if I tell
I've
someone
never heard this before.
so, like, if I say I should be doing something, like, oh, yeah, I really should be working out tomorrow, or you know what, I really should stop complaining. Either do that, like, that is the highest call ever that you should be doing that, or you are lying to yourself and you're not going to change anything. You're just trying to like send some signal and you're just adding more should on top of that cake that is only going to make you feel worse and more guilty. So those should
I love
statements,
the shoulding all over yourself. Like
it's
that's
so funny, right?
so going in the book,
Hey, you
man.
gave me
Like
bad breath, I'll give you should. But if I hear myself if I hear myself say some of these statements or express a negative attitude, don't get me wrong, like complaining with friends, especially when it's like with humor and stuff, that can be fun when you can be silly and make light of the things outside of your control. But in a professional context, in a leadership context, I try to be triggered by my own action so I can trigger an effective response as early as possible to stop that should stuff right where it is in its tracks. And then the more you do it intentionally and consciously, the more subconscious it becomes. So I can't say the word should now without thinking about that. But a lot of times those should statements in the past would be things either about myself or other people. Like somebody should be doing something like that's within my control. If I'm not communicating it, it's not at all. And even if I do communicate it, I might not control it. And if it's about myself, that's a decision. Why am I using that word? So that
yeah.
resonated with me.
Yeah, you gotta like assume responsibility. Like I should do this thing, but I'm not going to. Well, like that's then do it. you know? The I think that the on the complaining thing, there's definitely a lot of cultural power in embracing the suck and like cultivating a culture where people are proud of their resilience and just how much suck that they can take and obviously it can get crazy and like you don't want to abuse that. You don't want to abuse the people or allow them to abuse themselves. But as a constructive culture where people are proud of just what they will do to get the job done, and you end up with some perverse stuff that creates some interesting idiosyncrasies in culture. I just I don't know why I'm just having this memory right now, but I remember on my first submarine, there was a situation where the auxiliarymen had to go into the shit tank to get some like we had to pump it out, but it was still just completely disgusting in there. And we put him in a protective suit and all this and put a gas mask on him, but he had to go in to like retrieve something that had fouled up this thing just so the ship could get underway and like we could fix the pump or whatever. And it was like, okay, we're gonna have to send a man into this tank and they were fighting over who got to do it. you because they all knew it was just the most disgusting and awesome thing and like whichever one got to go into to be the one to like we send a man in to the shit tank. And of course now when he comes out he's got his hands are covered in just goo and he immediately starts chasing around his buddies and but that's sailors being sailors. It's great.
That's
The Navy's great.
and as I told you before we talked, when I confirmed you have been in submarine culture your entire career, which again,
Yeah.
almost 26 years, I asked you how you're so normal because the term bubblehead, which refers to individuals that typically spend their career on submarines, you guys tend to be an odd bunch, but you also have to be. You're underwater in this encapsulated dark area under high stress situations. And there is no other way to do it than to be wonderfully weird and to be able to have a good attitude at doing things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do or like in other situations. But to have that kind of culture of no matter how much it sucks, I know it's for this mission and I'm going to do it with humor, with a good attitude, and effectively, like that is resilience because you said that embracing the sucks can be taken too far. And I couldn't agree more. Like there is power in being able to dial in and endure adversity for as long as you have to, but no one can do that forever. I like to say the difference between resilience and burnout is recovery. So you need those methods either for yourself or your teams to recover. And sometimes you can recover while working through ways to impact attitude. And that can be done with humor. That can be done with the impressions and perspectives or the shared kind of impressions that you have on the task at hand. So you change the belief or you change the perspective or you add in humor and give other forms of recovery after embracing the suck. That's how you can maintain performance over time. But I love some of these sea stories, particularly from the submarine culture, because you guys are inherently asked to do some wild stuff, and then you add in a lot of wild stuff on top of it for some of the best stories I've ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, you made it sound like we're all just like a bunch of cheery dudes that like everyone's got a good attitude. There's there's no shortage of bad attitude on a submarine, but you gotta you gotta manage that, and it's just another thing to manage at the leadership level, and there's a lot of cultural power in just not being a dick. I think is that goes a really long way, and it's kind of a I as a leader, whenever I have new leaders report to the command, that's kind of one of the things that I tell them is like, hey, if it's your personality to just be a dick, like, okay, stop. All right, like this is the time to not do that anymore. That doesn't mean don't hold people accountable. It doesn't mean, don't expect a lot out of people. Like you need to do all those things while not being a dick as a human being. While it has to be from a position of wanting to succeed and wanting this individual to succeed, wanting this individual to recognize that they are going to be, that they're needed, that they are capable, and that they can do more than they thought that they could, because everyone can do more than they think they can. And it's a really beautiful thing whenever you're able to see that potential unlocked, and people step up and can really start performing at a high level. And that's just kind of one of my favorite things about the military. You keep mentioning how long I've been in, and when I think about it, I was like, I kinda have been in. Like, I don't feel like an old like an old salt or anything like that. I feel like a youngster, but I have been in for a long time.
And you don't
You know?
act like it. I mean, and I think part of it is just how deeply curious you are. Like you hear you talk on other podcasts, you see this book, like you're clearly a continuous learner. You're talking about not only, of course, the role you're passionate about in the military, but you're a dad, you're a husband, you have all of these other things outside the military that you're passionate about. So not only are you curious on how to be the best version of yourself on the submarine, but you see you applying this philosophy in all of these different domains. So whether it's tied to your career, and I'm a big fan of not being whether this is just I'm a dad. I'm only a dad, and you're another vulnerability would be a soul identity that you're like. Don't get me wrong. Like I am very grateful and very there's no bigger job in my life than being a father, but if I just tied myself to that identity, that is a risk. So finding ways for convergence and overlap of philosophy in all these different domains, I'm a big believer in, and I'm always trying to find ways to apply a mindset that I have in one area of perceived relative success to another area to develop different skill sets. And I'm getting that a
Yeah.
lot from your book.
I appreciate that. Ironically, like if you for the father example, if you just do that, if you just say, "All right, I'm just gonna be a father and nothing else," like you're probably gonna fail at being a father, because you're going to fail in your occupation, and you're not going to be able to provide, which is part of being a father for most people. If that is the role that you have in your family, and if it's not, that's fine. But somebody needs to. And I think that and like I say about the Stoics, what makes a philosophy good in my mind is that it helps to provide clarity. It provides more clarity than you had before. It provides a framework for thinking through things. Again, not a final truth, but it helps provide clarity. And the Stoics do a really good job in their construct of roles and how to manage roles. And the specific roles that I hold, I'm going to hold down a lot of specific roles in life. I am at this moment simultaneously a father, a son, a brother, a warfighter, and a citizen of my country. And if I just pick any of those things and just focus on that and to the expense of the others, then I'm going to fall down on kind of all of them in some way. My goal is not to just pick the one that works. My goal is to find the through line and find the appropriate actions that, to some degree satisfy all of these things. So it'd be easy to say that as a father, like I am somehow shorting my fatherhood by going on long deployments and things like that. And it's easy to talk yourself into that. Like, oh, I'm not going to be able to coach T-ball. This guy over here that, has this job that keeps him at home more, he must be a better father than me. Well, that's his occupation, that's his role. But there's a lot of value in my kids seeing that, like, hey, service is important and this job that dad has is important. Like, I don't like leaving home. It sucks. I hate it, but it needs to be done. And my kids, I think, recognize that. And I think that, as they grow up with that understanding of like, hey, dad sometimes has to leave and he doesn't like it, but it's important. And what he does is important to the country and important to others. And I think that there's a lot of fatherhood value in just that piece as an example of finding the through line, and that resonates through several other pieces of how Stoicism works. But the way that they set up roles, we all have roles to play in life, and it's basically the philosophy of do your job, you know. And then once you recognize that, then your job is to figure out what your job is, and that, like, you spend a lifetime doing that, like identifying your job. But regardless of all the specific roles that I always have a primary role above all of those others as a human being. I'm always, first of all, a human being. And what that implies is a specific imperative to do what is virtuous, and to pursue virtue, because it is the role of a human being to manifest reason, because that reason is what separates humans from animals. Reason is that divine, like, special faculty. It's the thing that humans have that nothing else has. And exercising reason in the Stoic view, if you really are reasoning well, you will conclude that the virtuous thing is the right thing and is the good thing to do. And so, no, what that means is that there's no villain role. You can't say, okay, well, my job is to be one of these guys who calls little old ladies and cons them out of their life savings, and that's how I make my money. If the Stoics would say, like, if that's your job, you need to get a better job because that job sucks. Like, that's an illegitimate role that has no moral binding power over you. Your obligation in that scenario is to do something constructive. So I think that provides a lot of power and moral clarity.
And in this age of information where all of the access that we have to what is happening in the world and people trying to make sense and add clarity to not only what's happening on this planet, but beyond it. I love how you explained how it added clarity to the roles that we play. And that is exactly what I found. Like, while trying to make sense of everything else happening around me, it doesn't matter if I can't even make sense of myself and the role that I play in the situations that I'm in. And I really appreciate how you talked about, I mean, there's going to be variable roles, but there's always ways to play those roles well, whether that is parental, whether that is professional, whether that is son, friend, or just human being. And something that you grapple with quite a bit in the book, which I found very interesting, and I really like some of the conclusions, if you will, that you drew from it, was in the military role, loyalty to country, and then cosmopolitanism, as you call it, or just like the universal humanity, and then having virtuous decisions and conduct within that dilemma, which can often arise, and how you grapple with that.
Yeah.
Is that something that you started thinking about deeply as you got into Stoicism, or when did that hit you, and how did you work through that?
It was specifically thinking about Stoicism as a philosophy in the military. You will see online in the popular Stoicism circles, and some of them you'll have some influencers who will say that The Stoics would, the military, Stoicism being popular in the military is obviously a bastardization of Stoicism, because if the Stoics were here with us today, they would tell you that the military is evil. And like, as we all know, the Stoics were cosmopolitans, and that this that they what the the military is completely incompatible with that. And and it was like tackling that problem, because I'm like, that intuitively is wrong. I mean, Marcus Aurelius is writing from the battlefield here. So was Marcus Aurelius just a hypocrite? Did he not understand his philosophy, or like, what's going on? And like, it can't make sense that being a cosmopolitan like implies that I can't be in the military, or that we just like we shouldn't have like there's so many things that just don't make sense with that. Like, okay, so if like do you want to say that, all right, you're a pacifist? And most of them say, well, no, 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 I'm not a pacifist. Like, obviously there's times that, you might need to have a military. Like, okay, well, who should do that? Obviously someone else, obviously not you, so should we just have these other people that are just morally screwed up while you get to live in your,
Oh,
and
for sure.
so like, but like reasoning through that, and trying to think like, this intuitively doesn't make sense. This seems to be wrong. Let me like break it down. And so it took a lot of digging in the Stoics to try to kind of reconcile these ideas. But the question of like, how can someone be a cosmopolitan and a warrior is a very tough question, and it's a very, very old question. But it would be worthwhile to say what a cosmopolitan is. Okay, in addition to a pink vodka based cocktail that I'm far too manly to admit is pretty good, you know, a cosmopolitan is a citizen of the cosmos, a citizen of the world, or someone who basically sees themselves as a member of every country, to some degree. And this is ancient, and this idea is like extremely influential in religions that popped up after ancient Greece, after Socrates, and the guy who actually coined "citizen of the universe" is Diogenes the Cynic, who is a predecessor to the Stoics. But the Stoics really took on that citizen of the universe idea. That doesn't mean I cease to be a citizen of my country. Okay, like, I don't cease to be a citizen. I don't cease to be a member of my family just because I am a citizen of my country. Likewise, I don't cease to be a citizen of my country just because I'm a citizen of the universe. I can be a citizen of all those things. I can be a member of all these different circles of community, and each one of them, each one of those is a role, and each one of those roles imposes a different set of moral obligations on me. My job is not to pick one and not the other. My job is to find the through line, to do what satisfies everything. So what that means in terms of war, it doesn't mean that I can never fight war. War is never appropriate. I mean, pacifism screwed up. It doesn't work. Like, there's a reason you don't find very many moral philosophers who are actually like hard pacifists, but it's because it just doesn't make it very far in reality. It very quickly gets you into scenarios where, you're either shirking duty, or you're letting something bad happen that could have, and whenever you get in arguments about this, people will say like, well, yeah, but everything the military does today is all screwed up. Like, oh, we can table that, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, can a warrior be a cosmopolitan? And, I argue yes. But what it implies, what follows from that, I am a citizen of this country with all the moral obligations thereto pertaining. And yet I am also a citizen of the universe with all the moral obligations thereto pertaining. What it means is that all wars are effectively civil wars. And that person across the battlefield from me, however unfortunate it is that it is my job to, possibly kill that person in this scenario, when it ceases to be my job to kill that person, we're fellow citizens of the same universe and same species. And that, implies some moral strictures on how I am to conduct myself in war, and how, I can't just indiscriminately kill people just because they're, you know, a member of a different country. I can't just, once I've captured prisoners, or they're incapacitated, I can't just kill them for no reason. Things like that. Like, And it turns out that these are like very old ideas. These are there's a name for this tradition of thought. It's called just war theory, and it's been, refined and systematized over thousands of years. This is a very old tradition. And one of the, this is, we're getting into real nerd stuff now, but one of my, kind of like what it dawned on me is like, okay, the Stoics would agree or assent to most of the ideas that are kind of most of the consensus ideas within the just war tradition that inform things like the laws of armed conflict and the rules of engagement and things like that. All that is, they're all kind of predicated on this just war tradition. The Stoics would agree with all those things if we had them around today, I think, or like most of the ideas. They would quibble with some points, but they would agree with the broad strokes of it. But it's not just because they make moral sense, although they do. It's because the Stoics provided the intellectual DNA for those same ideas. You know, the just war tradition as we have it today is mostly, attributed to like these old Catholics, from the Middle Ages, like Thomas Aquinas and, St. Augustine before him. But hundreds of years before Augustine, you had Cicero. And Cicero is very clearly laying out just war theory in his work De Officiis, and he's laying, this is 2,000 years ago, man, and he's laying out strictures on like, whenever we fight wars, we should do it this way and not that way. We should restrict our, total war was uncool 2,000 years ago. Okay, like it's always been uncool. It's not a new thing to say that we should limit ourselves in some way as a function of our humanity to protect ourselves and to protect our own country from the dishonor that would come from atrocity. And like this is coming from Cicero. But when Cicero is talking about this stuff, now Cicero is not technically a Stoic. He's an admirer of the Stoics. And like I can get into why, I think Cicero is kind of like my role model, from a philosophical standpoint because of his own independence there. But Cicero, as an admirer of the Stoics, is whenever he's talking about just war theory, if you look at what he's writing, says Posidonius says this, and Posidonius says that. He's riffing off the middle Stoics who we don't have their writings anymore. But he's basically like these ideas are coming from the Stoics before Cicero. Like, I mean, so these ideas are very old and they're Stoic ideas. And so I think that's just very interesting from a philosophy nerd standpoint.
Absolutely. And it boils down to moral actions in response to adversity. And a lot of people can get behind that at an individual level, where people have a hard time grappling with it, particularly if they don't have experience in that arena, is looking at it at scale. And of course, again, access to information in today's day and age, people will come up with every assumption in the world because of what they read or how they align politically or what it might be, and then draw these conclusions about what war is and how maybe everyone's bad or this side is bad for that reason, when it's obviously more complicated than that. But what your book does and what Stoicism can do, but again, for modern books interpretations, adding clarity to we can table some of the bad things that are done by any side in warfare because of sure that'll happen, bad leaders, bad decisions, whatever it might be, but the clarity in your role within the greater scale of war or adversity at scale, you can still conduct yourself virtuously, not only in your actions toward the enemy, but even in your responses to like an unjust order. And you talk about that as well. So you don't even talk, like, you obviously talk about conflict, but you also talk about how you respond up and down the chain of command based on things that don't make sense and speaking out. And that is true justice. And that takes courage. And it, I appreciate that because obviously life is complex and hardship is going to further complicate how we operate based on the multitude of stressors that we're dealing with at one time. But if you can add clarity again to what you truly control and add virtue to that, if we all did that individually, yeah, maybe we can start talking universal, getting along with our neighbors across every sea. But unfortunately, history is pretty obvious that evil is present. And if you are a pacifist, evil will take advantage. And it takes good to conquer that. So, how you do that morally, it's cool to hear you riff on that. It's been going on for a long time from these multiple philosophies, either independent individuals, Stoicism, Catholicism, or other.
Yeah. And when when we talk about providing clarity, I mean, again, if you're going to say like, okay, is this philosophy a good philosophy? The question is, does it provide clarity? And if there's any situation that can benefit from, something that can provide moral clarity, it's the profession of arms. Okay. And basically in the book, I continue to prefer to the warrior, the archetype of the warrior as the ultimate moral practitioner. And what I mean by that is if we're going to divide the world into theorists and practitioners, if you've got theorists that can sit in their classroom and levy judgment on the warrior, well, somewhere you've got practitioners in between them, and the warrior, if the theorist is clinically isolated from tough decisions, you know, the warrior is in it. The warrior is in the muck. He's at the opposite end of the spectrum, and it's just moral dilemmas from top to bottom. The profession of arms is moral dilemmas all the way down. So if there's anything that needs philosophy in it, it's that profession, and it's my profession. And I think that too often in in military culture, there can be a reflexive thing of like, oh, don't think too hard about it. Oh, you're overthinking about it. That doesn't work for me. Like that might work for some people, but to me, if you tell me like, oh, don't think about it, then I'll be damned if I'm not going to think about it at that point. And I would rather the people I work with have thought about things and think them through and get their, figure it out in their mind where they're at, such that whenever it becomes an emergency, I don't compound a physical emergency with a moral crisis at the same time. Okay, I want that moral clarity. I want all that stuff sorted out so that we're ready to act whenever it's time to act, and that's kind of part of it being a moral philosophy. Now the people who've got a problem and just got a beef with the military will say like, okay, you're rationalizing war and you're trying to, inculcate badness, and like, give the book a read and tell me if you still think that way, you know, and my argument is that warriors, being in the military is always a human thing. It's the ultimate human thing, and you don't get to leave your humanity behind. You have to, exercise it well. And so to be a good warrior, you have to do what a good human would do if they know everything that you know, and were exposed to all the information that you have been, you know, it still has to be what a good human would do in that situation. So what that means is whenever we look at it in the framework of role ethics, I can't do this thing just because I'm a good warrior. It has to be because I'm a good human that I do it. And yet it is, if I know everything that I know, then it's likely to be the right thing to do. And like, I mean, this weighs very heavily on me whenever I think about my job, but I'm comfortable. I know a lot about the stuff that's behind the curtain in my job, and the assumptions of where I'm at in the submarine, what I'm supposed to do, how I'm supposed to react to certain situations. And having thought these things through, I think make me a better leader and make me better positioned to do the right thing whenever it counts and whenever it matters. And that's kind of what I want from people.
And you just powerfully explained what I had mentioned as one of my favorite parts of the book is in your explanation of the warrior archetype and how to be a good warrior. It is comprised of being a good human. And when you maintain your humanity, obviously in the extremes of life, tragedy is going to happen, whether it's loss, whether it's killing, whether it's just prolonged adversity and things happening back home that you miss out on, and every other explanation that is serving, particularly operationally, is very challenging for individuals. What I appreciate that you write on too is like people are people in the military are not they're not going to do well if they are lowercase s stoic, unemotional, and then don't think deeply about things that have happened. Don't premeditate on it, which is important for preparation, but also post meditate on it and work through it and share and also grieve when it's challenging. So that was one of the distinctions that you drew out that might be different from modern interpretations of Stoicism, particularly influencers, where adversity is going to strike and humans are going to struggle. And that is part of Stoicism. It's recognizing those emotions, recognizing how normal that is to struggle after hardship, and then utilizing support and all the other things that we have options to if we're not managing ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and there are, this is whenever you get into this kind of stuff, you get into some of the places where I'm willing to say like, well, the Stoics aren't necessarily right about everything, and we understand the human mind. We know more about it than we did then, and there are some practices that they or some ways that they would see things that I don't necessarily think have it, and I think modern psychology probably has it down a little bit better. But it's good to look at those things and figure them out. For instance, I think that, I talk about moral injury, and the idea of the definition of moral, and this is still a, kind of a new idea. Not everyone necessarily agrees that this even exists, but, and I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not really qualified to comment. But what I can tell you, the definition of moral injury is basically whenever I no longer have the moral response to things that I think that I should. So I see blood and guts and stuff like that, and I don't have any emotional reaction. Because it's either been trained out of me or I've just seen so much blood and guts that I'm just, indifferent to it. And some people, generally that in psychology that will be seen as that is a good definition of moral injury. And the Stoics would say, well, you're just thinking about that correctly. I don't necessarily know that the Stoics are right. I think that a modern psychologist would tell you like, no, no, that's that's screwed up. You need to have some kind of moral, reaction to blood and guts. Now, how do we fix that? How do we heal from these things so that we kind of regain feeling? I don't know. Again, well beyond my expertise, but I do point that out as like maybe the Stokes aren't 100% on, that they didn't have the full picture of things that we do now, and no one does. There's no one's got 100% of it. I think, the Stoics had a bigger percent of useful ways to think about things than anyone else I found. you know, and one of the things that's worth discriminating on here is like I don't personally identify as a stoic. Some people do. Some people will say like I'm a modern stoic, and that is useful to some people. I like I like eclecticism. To be an eclectic is where you if you agree with the idea, you say like, okay, I think that that's correct. That's how I think now, And if you don't, you don't, and you that doesn't mean just willy nilly grab bag and just pick whatever is convenient at the moment. Like they have to cohere, they have to work together. And if you're just grabbing any idea that's convenient and just lying to yourself, the your ideas are going to have contradictions, and you're going to, you're going to be confused and not really helping yourself, not really getting out of philosophy what you can. But I think that going into philosophy with the mentality that these people that I'm studying are human beings and they can be wrong about stuff and they're probably wrong about some stuff. Having that mentality is kind of the only philosophically honest way to approach it. Because if you don't approach it like that, then you're going to approach it like, oh, these guys are prophets. Their words are divinely inspired and stuff like that. But they're not even telling you that. They're not saying that. So just because Epictetus, doesn't like honey cakes or something like that, doesn't mean that I have to give up honey cakes because it doesn't have anything to do with, it doesn't follow from Stoic precepts. And even if it did, I could say, well, I think he's wrong about that. And there are things I think they're wrong about, and I think being willing to criticize, you get more out of it because you're able to engage it with you bring a more engaged mind, you bring a philosopher's mind to the task of engaging with these ideas. What philosophy is a 2,000-year-old conversation between mortals. That's what it is. It's not some final truth handed down. And I think that's an important approach. And so that's why Cicero is kind of my model. Cicero is this Roman statesman, very important guy in political philosophy, very influential on the founding fathers of the United States. And Cicero, he admires the Stoics and he writes extensively about them, a lot of times reflecting their ideas. And a lot of what we know about the original early Greek Stoics and what they believed comes from Cicero's writings because he wrote so much and he wrote so well that it's been preserved. And but Cicero he's not a Stoic. He identifies as an academic skeptic, but he takes a lot of ideas from the Stoics and and then some of them he's like, yeah, I think they're wrong about this, and he criticizes them in some ways. I think that's the way to approach it.
I like it. I couldn't agree more. And it's part of that vulnerability thing I was reflecting on earlier. Like when you align so rigidly with one system, inherently you're going to read anything, let's say Stoicism in this case, anything from the Stoics, absolute truth. Anything that refutes it, discarded, doesn't align with me, so I'm just discounting that. So you close yourself off to other possibilities that could benefit you and your ability to serve others in this world and make the most out of this life virtuously. So I like that eclecticism approach of, yeah, I'm not just not willy nilly like this works for me, so I'm gonna tag that onto myself right now. But no, this converges well with the foundational things that are virtuous and right for the roles that I'm living. And if some of it comes from Stoicism, some of it comes from Cicero, who I see that name more and more these days. I've read a few of his things, and our conversations only making me want to buy a few of those books on my list right now. But absolutely, staying open minded, staying curious, staying uncertain about most things in this world allows you opportunities that you never could have predicted because you are not so rigid in your beliefs to where you discard everything else. You said something
Absolutely.
earlier, one of my favorite words, should. So about how people react to blood and guts or other extreme forms of adversity, and how Stoics. I agree with you. Like there are many things in Stoicism, and Stoicism is interesting too because you have, of course, overlapping concepts, but just really people who liked the philosophy then gave their own interpretations of it through the text that we are able to preserve over time. But you'll see different colors of impressions and interpretations from the major Stoics and the other ones that we still have. So it's hard, other than the concepts that we derive from one rigid Stoic philosophy, but overall, like how we react to adversity and what is right versus wrong. I think we can get caught up on what we should or shouldn't do based on that stressor. So if you experience death, let's say in this case, not of a loved one, you should be severely impacted by that. And there's another use case of those shoulds that I'm not sure of. I think there is way more considerations that taken a place. We for sure need to have support systems in place. You need to have your own support systems that you can rely on, maybe your own experience, your own strategies, and your own team and leaders. It's just that culture could influence you to be fine after that kind of experience. If my child were to die tomorrow, I probably should respond to that with some grieving. If I didn't at all, that would be quite concerning. If a child dies on the other side of the world tomorrow, which they will, and that is terrible when you reflect on it, I'm gonna be okay. If I'm made aware of that, that's gonna impact me. But when we talk about cosmopolitanism, like the more I'm aware of that situation, the more it might impact me. But that variance in how we respond to adversity, there's a lot of normalcy in that. And we tend to define things as either good or bad. And Stoicism does that sometimes, and I'm not a big fan of that. I'm not a big fan of that anywhere. I think defining good and bad is very hard, other than some of these universal truths that we can all get behind for the most part. It's very hard to do outside of yourself. So
Well, the Stoics, like the Stoics define virtue as the sole good. Okay, virtue is what is good and nothing else is, and vice is what is bad and nothing else is. It's kind of like that's like the foundational, like keystone concept. But what is good? Like what they're saying is good. There is worth unpacking because they might be using the word differently than we are. Basically, good to them is something worth pursuing. Something worth being attracted to, and it's kind of another less understood precept of them that I if I perceive this thing as good, I must be attracted to it. There's no choice there. Like I can't turn that away. I can't fail to be attracted to it and to pursue it. Basically, the fact that I see it as pursuit worthy is wrapped up in the definition of the fact that I see it as good. If that makes any sense. And so they're basically saying that virtue is the thing that is pursuit worthy there. And they're hard and fast about that. Anyway, I don't that
eh,
I got into theory there.
but what I like
Yeah.
about virtue as a pursuit is it's really just like a how. So like we talk about like courage and defining that, or discipline, or justice. Like it's very hard to define a courageous action in another person.
Mhm.
You can make assumptions, but one act of retreat or fighting, or you give the explanation, could be an act of courage for a variety of reasons, even though maybe us in that same situation for different reasons might act differently that is equally courageous. I have a hard time determining virtue in someone else without them fully explaining themselves. And even then, it's hard based on how well they know themselves because I'm still trying to figure out how well I know myself and really thinking back to that how I'm living every day. So I like thinking about virtues or our core values as those like how we implement our why no matter what. And that's
Yeah.
kind of my take on. I'm curious as what you think of that.
Well, like, can I nerd out on, like, the different, theories of ethics for a second? You know, you've
Please.
basically got, and this is, like, I remember this in, like, Ethics 101 and back in college, you've got these major schools of ethics of, like, how do I determine what is the right thing to do? And the for hundreds of years there's been a battle between these two basic schools of thought. One was utilitarianism or consequentialism, which is basically like whatever creates the best result for the highest number of people is the right thing to do. Okay, but there are flaws with that. But that makes sense in a lot of ways. Is like it's like a very pragmatic way of looking at things. If this thing feels good, but it doesn't really result in anything good for anyone or sufficiently good, then it's probably not worth doing. So like a utilitarian probably wouldn't vote, because what is that vote going to actually accomplish? You know, uh, as an individual. They might not recycle, and so it's like, well, that seems shitty. Like that doesn't seem right intuitively. And so on the other like view of it is deontology, which in the deontological framework, which is comes off the work of Immanuel Kant, it is the idea is what I should do, what is good, is what would be good if everyone did. If it were, if it, be- it I should basically act as if whatever I do became a universal rule that everyone did. And so in that case, like the deontologists, they would they would definitely vote, because it would be right for it's good if everyone does it. And that should guide my moral action. And those two schools like kind of butted heads for the longest time. And then eventually people kind of started giving credit to like, hey, you know what, before you had these two schools, you had this other thing called virtue ethics. And virtue ethics doesn't look at it in either of those ways. Virtue ethics can't give you a answer of what is the right thing to do, but what virtue ethics is looking at it from the framework of what would a virtuous person do. It's basically what would a perfect human being do if they were in this situation. And so it's an action-based framework instead of an agent-based framework, if that makes any, or I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Virtue ethics is an agent-based framework, whereas the other two are action-based frameworks. And virtue ethics can't give you an answer like it's not a formula that you can apply, but we don't actually think in formulas in real life anyway, that no one actually does that. And so Thomas Jefferson is, hundreds of years from now, he is reacting to these two schools of, deontology and consequentialism. And he's basically frustrated with moral philosophy writ large. And he's writing to someone and he says, in a given a moral question, a plowman is more likely to come to the right answer than a professor. And that is, I think it's such a good line, because it's like so right. Because a professor is going to sit there and hem and haw and like reason and rationalize and do all this crap, and a plowman is going to like look at it and be like, well, it's obvious this is what someone should do because that's what a good person would do. And that's kind of the way virtue ethics is to me. It's intuitive, and the Stoics were one of many different schools of virtue ethics in their time, and I think that they're like the best one,
Yeah.
And anyway, I don't know how I got on that on the professor tangent, but that I think that that's a really good way of thinking about it. It's okay, what would a perfect person do in this situation, knowing what I know, and I think that that's a helpful way of reasoning through it. So again, like you were saying, like your virtue may not be my virtue. You might have different values, and that's true. And people are going to butt heads over that. People are going to butt heads over what virtue is, and some people are going to have this, really social conservative version of it, and then some of the people are going to think that a good person is an environmentalist, and
Right.
you're going to have all these things. Well, as long as they're like really actually committed to being good people, I'm down with that, and most people do. but we can easily rule out people who are like, "Well, I'm greedy because just that's how I am," and you
Yeah.
know, and you should be like me. Like, nope, I don't want to be like you. Yeah, I can point at that and say like, well, that's wrong. you know,
Anyone who says
so
bad breath is part of their personality can be discounted.
that's
But
right. Yeah,
but no, that was a great explanation. And you see it in Christianity. What would Jesus do? And
yeah,
a lot of other examples of that. But coming back to your role identity and how people play their role. So whatever your why is. So like for example, like the most important thing to me right now is to be a good father, husband, and man. So
yeah,
when I look at the values that I try to implement into my life every day, it's through that frame. So how can I be the best father, the best husband, and the best man that I can be for my community, for my country, and for the world? And that frame, that very simple sentence, gives me that line for okay, what would a disciplined father do right now, whether that's in the physical realm, the mental realm, and all these other areas that I'm trying to build myself, sustain myself, and recover so I can show up the best that I can in those ways. But your explanation of virtue ethics allows for the variability and the diversity that you mentioned of whether wherever you fall on the political spectrum, wherever you fall in the world, you can ask yourself a simple question like that of what is your purpose right now in this phase of your life, and how can you live that out in the roles that you have to be the best version of yourself there virtuously? And I agree with you that stoicism can provide some clarity to those answers in yourself. Because we the dichotomy of control, which we didn't get in much to at all, and you definitely cover in your book when you start thinking about what we truly have control over. We can influence a lot of things around us, particularly as leaders, in our actions, in our behavior, and our attitude, as we've discussed already. But even to exhibit that requires a lot of self command and internal, where the true control lies, to even have a chance of the positive influence to control anything. And we're not controlling anything, we're influencing anything outside of ourselves. So that was another thing that I drew from your book very well, that aligned with the original Stoic text that I really appreciated, was adding very practical um, explanations and actionable steps that we can take in our respective roles to do just that.
can I ask you a question and put you on the spot
Of
here?
course.
Did you disagree with anything in the book? Is there anything that you're like, "Oh, Spears is off his rocker here?"
So I'm trying to think back. I it's I I didn't let's just say this way. Black and white, I was like objectively I disagree with that. There wasn't anything like that. So I
Okay.
was not expecting that question. So I'm trying to think back. There were things.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're
We're
good.
not supposed to do that. I'm the
No,
guest here.
please. I don't. No, absolutely. I like it. It
Yeah,
was the part of your book we were talking about like how you differ from modern stoicism quite a bit, or certain
yeah,
interpretations that you may find. I'm trying to remember some of those. If you could remind me some of those key distinctions. Like a lot of modern stoicism is self-help. And I agree with that for the
yeah,
modern interpretation of the stoicism, where you lean much more on service. And of course, to sustain service, we need to take care of ourselves. But I remember some of the sentences there were it, like that little dichotomy of like we do
yeah,
need to be selfish in our actions so we can be selfless in the long term. Like that's often what I teach. So like there were maybe a few things there that I was like, maybe I would word it a different way, but I would never be able to
yeah.
write a book like this. So who gives a shit what I think about these few sentences?
I don't like do a lot of the gatekeeping of the Stoic, like what's real Stoicism
Yeah,
and like the fake the Broicism and like I just don't care.
same.
Like there's so much bickering about that online, and like I will sometimes engage in online forums and stuff like that because I like to talk to people about this stuff, and I like to people are like, hey, what would the Stoics say about this kind of thing, and I like to weigh in on it. And you have a certain amount of people who will like, "Oh, that's the guy that justifies war with stoicism, and, like, he's all screwed up," and it's like, "Dude, like, if you wanna come at me, like, okay." You know? But, uh what you will find is those people, what they will do is they will say like they will impose their politics into cosmopolitanism. They will basically say, well, the Stoics were cosmopolitan, and they will do this shift where cosmopolitan means pro-social, and they'll say, okay, well, I am pro-social, therefore, the cosmopolitans were pro-social, I am pro-social, therefore the Stoics would adopt all of my politics. And it's like, no, no, that's where you are misaligned here. There are things that reasonable people can disagree on, and what you were saying is obviously vicious, where the Stoics would obviously do or not do XYZ. XYZ to you is obviously right, but it's not to everybody. And there are good, reasonable reasons that people might disagree with you. Anyway, I don't really care, you know, but a lot of people want to like pigeonhole and like all these stoic influencers or they've all got it wrong. And if you really read them like I do, you would see that they agree with me on all these things. Like, no, they wouldn't. Like, and it just doesn't matter that much. I guess I will care if like neo-Nazis start going around and, I I got this knife symbol on the cover of my book and I was starting thinking about it like what if like neo-Nazis start waving this flag around? That would really suck. But I don't think that's gonna happen. But you know, like aside from something like that, like I don't care. Like people are gonna get whatever they get out of it because the thing is you can't change what the ancient philosophers said and thought. Like it's there. You're not going to distort it or change it into anything else. And if you've got some screwed up beliefs and you start reading it, you can't make it very far with like the wrong ideas. You can't say that the Stoics thought something that they didn't if you actually open the book and read it. And that's kind of also part of my approach is kind of the military approach is if I'm tasked to go figure something out and write a report on it. The first thing I'm gonna do is say, okay, what does the book actually say? I'm gonna break out the book and open it up and say, let's look in the actual references. And so that's why you got all the citations and everything like that. It's like, okay, let's do our homework and actually look this up. And that's I think that's the approach. And so because of that, I'm just not threatened by the various different strains of modern popular stoicism. I just don't care. Like people are going to get out of it whatever they want. I think it's a force for good in the world. Whether you think it's left coded or right coded, it is anti-radicalizing and therefore it is good for the political discourse. What is absolutely like antithetical to stoicism, regardless of where you come down politically, grievance and victimhood like have no place in it. And those are things that just poison the discourse on like all sides. And if we just remove all the grievance and the victimhood and the fear and the loathing, like all we have left are reasonable policy disagreements, argued in good faith. And like that's the stuff we need to be doing. We need to be discussing these things and sorting them out. And so I think it's a force for good in the world, kind of any way you cut it. So
Agree.
I hope more people read Stoicism.
And it's uncomfortable to read if you really push it back on yourself for that deep reflection on a lot of things that you'll get from the original text, which I appreciate you highlighting. And of course, hearing you talk live, let alone all the references you make in your book, you can tell how well read you are on the original text. Because a lot of people think that they're big fans of Stoicism and they're reading modern interpretations, and you give 100 people one book, whether it's one of the original texts or not, there'll still be a variety of interpretations of that and how it applies to their life based on where they are, how well read they are, how literate they are, and um, many other reasons for why they may take it in a way that wouldn't be agreeable across the board. So I
Yeah.
stopped giving a shit about that a long time ago, thanks to Stoicism, because I would spend a lot of time like having these debates or these discussions, but that energy it can be directed in much better places. Like you also write on your book, like that energy directed on things within my command, within my control, so I can actually fulfill the roles that are important to me rather than trying to influence or control things external to me that are a waste of time. Bring it back to what you can learn about yourself, but it is uncomfortable. But if you're willing
Yeah.
to do that honestly and genuinely, there is a lot of room for self improvement for what you emphasize and what you will also find in Stoic text service to humanity in the respective roles that we play. And it gets really hard to argue with self improvement, fulfillment, and service to the world, no matter what role you play. And you get a lot of insights on how to grapple internally so you can expand externally in the different ways that you can.
Yeah, and those things cohere,
Yeah.
like self-improvement and service to the world. Like humans are supposed to improve themselves. And there's pushback out there on like, oh, grind culture and all the self-improvement stuff. And it's like, no, we should be improving ourselves. We should be working hard. We should be trying to perform, in all the ways that matter. It's just like let's make sure that it's the ways that actually matter. But
Yeah.
self-improvement, like that impulse to become better than we are is that is the natural human impulse. That's what it means to live in accordance with nature. To the Stoics. The Stoics often say a human being should live in accordance with nature. They're not talking birds and trees and stuff. They're talking human nature to inhere or manifest virtue as reason. And that is what human nature is anyway.
And if you're not trying to get better, I can assure you you're getting worse. Like, there
Absolutely.
is no maintenance. Like, again, that check in the box, like, "Up, I'm a stoic, I'm good to go. Don't need to focus on that anymore." You're gonna start slipping right away. So, like,
Yeah.
self-improvement, like, a lot of people look at that like it's somehow selfish. Like, no. Like, again, in the ways that are important to you, in the domains of your life, again, I like to talk about physical, mental, social, and spiritual. Uh, there's a lot of mindsets that we can kind of overlap across those domains, but very individualized skill sets. So that's great if I'm getting better in the gym, I'm getting stronger. But if my marriage is suffering, there's no amount of work that I can do in the gym to help my marriage. I need to focus on that domain and then embrace hardship and try to get better there very intentionally and be willing to do that while I'm uncomfortable so we can get back to a point of comfort. But yeah, like there is no just sustained level that we're good to go at. And as time and nature takes its toll on us, that ability to keep improving, we're obviously going to plateau in some ways when it comes to like physical exertion or things like that. But it's pretty amazing plasticity, what's possible throughout the lifespan if you continually put in the reps and intention in those domains. So self improvement is a necessity, not only for fulfilled living, but for service throughout your life for as long as possible, while you're lucky enough to have it.
Yeah, I'm at the phase now. I'm a few years older than you. I'm 43, and it was like a lever went over whenever I turned 40 that just everything starts breaking. Like I'm an old power lifter, like from college. And I just like lifting heavy weights. It's what I enjoy doing physically, and it's what I want to do, and I just can't do it anymore. And when I go to the gym, and it's like a few lifts in, I'm gonna lift heavy today, and something pops, and then I'm like broken for months, and it just doesn't want to heal, and it's like I just can't do that anymore. The doctor's like, "You're an idiot. You're 43 years old. Act like it." I'm like, "Well, okay, I guess I'll get my cane and you know, start hobbling around." But what it means is that I've got to accept that and do other things. And there are other things that I need to be doing now that are appropriate for my age that don't necessarily mean just get old and fat. It means that I need to be doing more mobility, and I need to be working, making sure that my heart is healthy and do all those things so that you know I'm at peak performance as appropriate for a 43-year-old, and those things are a different definition than they were for a 23-year-old, and that's just facts.
Yeah.
So, but there's always something you can do.
100%. When you run into a wall, you don't need to quit, pivot. So you can
Yeah.
like quitting in life. Like there's a lot of things where I have no problem with quitting when it doesn't serve you, your roles, and your purpose. But don't just quit altogether. Find a new path. Find a new thing to do. This was incredible. I could talk to you for hours like we've done a little bit already, and I would
Yeah.
love to again. I know you are quite busy and you have some things coming up in your career, but I look forward to staying in touch. I look forward to the many more books that I hope that you're going to write, and hopefully get to talk to you again soon, brother.
Yeah, absolutely, man. This was great.
Amazing. So we'll definitely link to your book. And if I recall, you might be writing on Substack a little bit yourself in the coming future. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the plan. So hopefully by the time that this airs, you can throw the Substack link in the show notes and everything, and I'll have something started. It's probably not something I'm gonna like update all the time
Yeah.
because like I have a busy life, but I need to write, and like now that the book's over, I'm getting stir crazy, and I just want to write something because just my mind's gonna melt if I don't, and so I think that I'll start a Substack,
Well, it's a
and
great place for it, and I have no
yeah,
doubt there will be a lot of people very interested in more things you have to write, especially if they make a good choice. Well, I'll use the word good, a good choice, and buy your book because again, it's one of the
yeah,
best books that I've read for a modern interpretation of Stoicism and how to apply it to your life, either in extreme realms like the military, but as you parallel very well, really in any form of life to be the best person that you can be. Thank you, sir,
yeah.
for your time. It was a pleasure.
Hey, thanks a lot, Kyle.
Absolutely. Remember, all the knowledge in the world means little unless you uniquely apply it to your life. Challenge yourself to take action Knowledge applied is wisdom earned. Determine what is important to you and get after it with intention, effort, and consistency. Until next time, stay resilient, my friends.